Alright guys, Murph's here, and today we're going to talk about this. A Glock 41 Gen 4 chambered in 45 ACP. Now in order to talk about this, we are going to talk about a little bit of background. I'm going to go ahead and warn you guys right now, there's definitely a rabbit hole in this background section. So if the background portion is taking too long, or if you're really not interested in the background on this particular handgun because it's really not historic, go ahead, check the description. I have chapters annotated there, and you can go ahead and jump to information that you actually want to consume. As for the rest of you, this handgun came out in 2014, and this was the 45 caliber entry in the practical tactical lineup in Glock's catalog. Now, what is the practical tactical lineup? These are Glock's competition ready-made pistols. Now, important thing to keep in mind is that these guns are built so that you can compete in any stock classification in pretty much any of the competition circuits. In order for it to really be able to run with like race guns and stuff like that, you do have to do some upgrades to these pistols. Now, a question might be, why would someone want a 45 caliber competition pistol? Most competition shooters shoot 9mm because it's economic, light recoiling, high magazine capacity, all those types of things. However, in some competition circuits, you have major and minor power factors, and that impacts how grading is done. So if somebody wanted to get into major power factor, which 45 is a solid contender for, and they wanted Glock features, perhaps they're already used to Glock pistols, or they want to have like all of the benefits of a Glock pistol in competition combined with the 45 ACP, this is what they would go for. Now, this has also been produced in an MOS, which would further benefit anybody who is looking to use this for practical or tactical means. And so far, only produced in the Gen 4, and this is where a rabbit hole comes in at. I don't expect to ever see this gun in a Generation 5 for two reasons. One is going to come back to the side, which we'll talk about more in features, but one of the important things to keep in mind with Glocks is Glock has been truly individual in its frame designs over the years. The 9mm 40 and 357 SIG Glock models are built on 9mm frames. That's interesting because when the 40 Smith & Wesson cartridge first came out, a lot of manufacturers tried to just put a larger hole in the slide of their 9mm pistols in order to be able to have them be 40 Smith & Wesson guns. A lot of those manufacturers started breaking frames and would wind up eventually going over to slightly larger frames so that they could have the same frame be utilized with either 9mm or 40 Smith & Wesson guns. Glock has had some issues with that over the years, generally being very high round count 40 Smith & Wesson guns, but Glock's been making 40s for a long time and not had like rampant issues with them. So it's been like onesie twosies, isolated events, all that kind of stuff. They stuck with the 9mm frame, regardless of those cartridges being loaded into it. The 40 Smith & Wesson and 357 SIG definitely being higher impulse than the 9mm. They only really changed their frames the first time when they went to the 10mm cartridge, which was the Glock 20, which went to a larger frame. It's since they already had a larger frame, they also made their 45 caliber version, the Glock 21, in that larger frame as well. So, you know, bigger bullet, all that kind of stuff, be able to still have higher capacity, which Glocks were known for at the time, combined with that beefy frame. There are other times where Glock has changed their frames, but it's pretty few and far between. It's for very specialty or niche requirements and stuff like that. Glock 41 is an example of that. Now, when Glock came out with the Gen 5s, they changed the design of their slide. And there was an early theory that we would not see anything but 9mm in the Gen 5. Now, here recently, Glock has come out with multiple calibers in the Gen 5, starting off with the 40 Smith & Wesson. And if you look at the 40 Smith & Wesson guns, those slides are larger. So Glock changed their formula, which is something that's very interesting because prior to this, Glock pistols in the 9mm 40 and 357 SIG have always been a little bit smaller and a little bit lighter than their competitive options. Now we're starting to see a shift there. Glock also came out with the 20 and 21 in a Generation 5. And you could say that the same overall concept, right? Well, if they have to beef up the slide a little bit, it's still going to be probably less beefy than the 21. But it runs us into the second part of my assessment that we'll probably never see a Generation 5, in that I don't think the Glock 41 is selling all that well. So I don't think there's an interest in pushing it into that next category and spending the time to design that. Now, guys, I am not a firearms engineer and I'm not a Glock insider. So next week, a Gen 5 41 could come out, and then I would be wrong. But at this point, this snapshot in time from this person's completely unqualified opinion, we'll probably never see a Gen 5 41. Perfectly fine with being wrong on that, but there it is. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers the background portion of this. Why don't we go ahead and get into the features of this particular handgun? Right off the bat, we have a 5.31 inch barrel. This is still polyagonally rifled, which it's important to remember to not make a habit of shooting lead cast ammunition through polyagonal rifled pistols. Based on how that rifling is designed and the fact that lead cast ammunition leaves leading behind in the barrel, you could potentially run into a situation where you have an overpressure event in your barrel. That's not a very good thing. So first off, clean your guns frequently, but also second off, don't make a habit out of that type of ammunition. Now, in addition to that, you'll note that I have replaced these sights. If you've seen my Glock 34 Gen 4 video, both the original and the revisit, you know that I'm not a big fan, which, by the way, link in the description, you know that I'm not a big fan of Glock stock sights. Now, this gun I purchased after I made the decision that Glock sights are going to be the first thing I change on Glock handguns whenever it is that I first buy them. And I dropped in these Trijicon HDs. Okay, so we can see here they're very tall sights. We have a lime green front sight with a tritium insert. We have tritium sights in the rear. Otherwise, that rear sight is pretty blacked out. It is serrated in order to cut down on glare. We have a pretty nice shelf on there so that if I need to rack it off of like a table or my belt or something like that, I can do so. And we also have a kind of U shape to the notch. Very spacious rear sight. We'll talk about that more once we get into shooting. Now let's go ahead and start talking about the slide. We have a lot to talk about with this slide. First off, we have the bull nose cuts on the front, which originally came out on the Glock 26 and 27, 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson subcompact guns, and then showed up on the Practical Tactical line and are now standard on all Gen 5s. So it's supposed to help with like reholstering. The only time I could see that being helpful is if you're like reholstering in a leather holster, like an Uncle Mike's or something like that, which most people are running Kydex now, so I don't think this is nearly as advantageous as it used to be, but it looks good, so, I'll accept it. We'll also note that we do not have the lightning cut in the top of the slide like we do on the Gen 4, 34, and 35 9mm and 40 Smith & Wesson chambered handguns, which is surprising because these are both Gen 4s. Now, on the Generation 5s, they went away from the window cuts as well. But the whole point of the window cut was to lighten up the slide so as to have a better relationship with like the flippiness of the barrel, bouncing out like recoil impulse, as well as maintaining reliability and all that kind of stuff with the longer barrel and slide and all that kind of stuff. So what, did they just stop doing that on this pistol and on the Generation 5s? No. They went to lightning cuts on the inside of the slide. So we can see here, this has been thinned out a little bit, and then also we have some areas milled out around the striker channel. Now, a little aside to keep in mind here, whenever you put this gun back together, this barrel gets like kinked in the slide super easily. One of the takes that I did earlier, it got kind of wedged in there and I had to stop and like redo everything because I had to take a moment to get that thing apart again. It was really annoying. Now, the great thing about this is that all of our weight savings are done on the inside so that we don't have a giant hole in the slide that could potentially pick up a bunch of debris and stuff like that and compromise the reliability of the system. Now, since I've got this slide already off, I want to go ahead and show you the next interesting thing about the 41 slide. And that is, if I put these two slides up against each other, you will see that the 41 is just a little bit bigger. Not drastically so. I wish I had a Glock 21 slide here in order to be able to compare it, but there are fractions of an inch difference in this. And that's really interesting because theoretically, this should be a pretty beefy slide. In fact, if you put the Glock 41 up against like the Glock 40, that gun is massive. Glock went the other direction. They massively beefed up the long slide 10mm, the Glock 40. in order to be able to handle like higher pressure cartridges and all that kind of stuff. They did not do that with the 41. That's going to play a part in our conversation on shooting coming up here in a bit. Why did Glock go to a smaller, lighter frame in the 41? Or, excuse me, a smaller, lighter slide. The frame is the same size as the Glock 21. The slide is not. My theory, and I'm pretty sure I'm right about this, is so the 41 would fit in the 34 and 35's holsters. So that way, if you're somebody who was already competing with the 34, you could use your same holsters, your same draw, stroke, and all that kind of stuff with this handgun. And there are way more options out there for the more mainstream 9mm and 40 caliber Glocks. For all those things built on that 9mm frame, there are a ton of options. There's still a lot of options for the 45s and the 10mm and the 45 gaps and all that kind of stuff that are built on different frames, but nothing beats the aftermarket support for the 9mm framed guns. So Glock cashed in on that by making the slide more capable of being able to fit that. I bet you there are some leather holsters out there this probably wouldn't fit, but in any of the Kydex stuff that you can kind of adjust the tension on, you should absolutely be able to fit a Glock 41. All right, now we have a loaded chamber indicator here on the extractor. I'm not a big fan of loaded chamber indicators. I've always felt like the Glock loaded chamber indicator was very much so an afterthought. I don't consider this tactile. It's definitely visual, it's not tactile. That's why I employ press checks. Now, press checks are a very polarizing opinion within the Second Amendment community. A lot of times if you do a press check, somebody's like, what do you think you are, John Wick? And that never made sense to me. The most important thing is knowing the condition of your firearm. That is numero uno. If that means that you do a press check or you work off of loaded chamber indicators or x-ray vision or whatever it is that you do, I don't care as long as you know. I have seen way too many times at competitions and courses and stuff like that where somebody's walked up to the line with a gun that they 100% know is loaded, and then they've gone to shoot that course of fire and had a click no bang on the first attempt. Checking is knowing. Inspecting is knowing. You have to expect to inspect type of deal. So make sure you know the condition, because doing that at a competition or a course or something like that, okay, you get some egg on your face, you're a little embarrassed, you go on about your day. You do that in real life and you could have a very different outcome. All right, so enough about loaded chamber indicators. We also have our standard Glock rail. You can mount lights, lasers, whatever it is that you want to on there. The trigger guard is squared off and textured. So if you're somebody who grips the front of the trigger guard, you can still do that. We'll talk about that more once we get into shooting. We have a single side slide release. This is something that I actually find kind of weird. On the 34 and 35, there is an extended competition slide release stock from Glock, which we see has this little like earlobe here in order to be able to give you more surface area to contact. We do not have that on the Glock 41. I'm really confused by that as to why that's not there. Now, in addition to that, I'm also noticing a lot more wear on it than I have on my 34 that I've had for much longer, which it's not unusual to see that part wear quite a bit. It's really annoying. Glock does a great job of finishing the slide and all the other portions of this gun, but they really seem to cheap out on the slide release. Now, is it a slide release or a slide catch? I don't care. It's the glass half empty or half full. Am I filling it? Am I pouring something into the glass, or am I drinking from the glass? Those are whatever way it is that works for you. I'm not the biggest fan of using my slide release for my reloads. That is entirely because of how I train. I train around a bunch of different handguns with different manual of arms with the slide release in different locations, but the slides are always in the same location, so I overhand rack my slides. However, I will acknowledge that a slide release reload is much faster, and it's definitely much faster when it is accessible with your firing side thumb, which is, if I was somebody who used slide release reloads, is what I would be monitoring for. This has been very easy. It has historically been very easy to hit. I still haven't necessarily trained around doing slide release reloads with this, but once upon a time I did, and I trained with Glocks back then, and I never really missed these. I never had any issue with activating it. All right, let's talk about our trigger. So the trigger in the practical tactical line is supposed to be better. It's generally supposed to be a little bit lighter. However, I don't think this one is. It really feels like a pretty standard stock Glock trigger to me. So we have a little bit of mush that we have to power through. It's like mud. And then we get on a very stiff wall. And we have a pretty crisp break. Our reset puts us pretty much right back on that really stiff wall. I'm not a fan of this trigger. I've been very unhappy with it. We'll talk about that more once we get into shooting. Our magazine release is the Generation 4, very large mag release, a great improvement over the Generation 3. It is reversible. Very easy to hit, big fan of this mag release. Being a Gen 4, we still have finger grooves on the gun. I've never been bothered by finger grooves, but since I'm not bothered by their presence, I'm definitely not bothered by their absence type of deal. I could understand how someone would not like them, especially if their fingers don't match up properly with them. This is a Generation 4 gun, so of course we have the interchangeable back straps, but this being the 21 frame, being very thick, if I add any additional grip to this, it makes it too big for my hand. I don't feel like I'm getting a good grip on the gun, so I run it without any of the grip extensions. Our magazine holds 13 rounds, comes with 3 magazines, fantastic capacity in a 45 ACP. That's one of the great things about one of the great features about Glocks in general, but also this if you were trying to take it into major power factor, and we'll talk about that more later. Now, when it comes to magazine releases, this gun drops magazines free very easily. I do have to index Glocks a little differently whenever it is that I do reloads. Otherwise, I wind up like mashing the follower into the pistol grip, and that's not very helpful. So I have had some issues with my 34 dropping magazines freely, but not any issues with this gun, at least not as of yet. We also have the Glock rough texture finish on here. We'll talk about this more once we get into shooting, but I really notice that texture on this gun. And then also we have a lanyard hole if you're somebody who uses lanyards. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers features. How does it shoot? Shooting this gun is kind of a chore. Let me explain. So these sights, very easy to grab. I actually absolutely love these sights, would highly recommend them. When it comes to fast shooting, however, when it comes to precise shooting, not my favorites. And that is because we have a lot of air in the rear sight, and it's very difficult to get a nice, fine, consistent bead. That's kind of one of the trade-offs that you have to take into account whenever it is that you're talking about pistol sights. You could have nice, narrow, tight sights that give you really pretty groupings, but they're not necessarily going to be the fastest and easiest to acquire if you're doing any more practical style of shooting or defensive style shooting. So, like, I have sat around and I have managed to pull off good groups with this gun. It is a lot of effort. I've also gone through some drills where, like, I do multiple bullseyes. So I put out like 5 targets, and my goal is to hit the bullseye in every one of those targets. And I have difficulty bullseyeing all 5 targets, but I will at least get the hits in A zone, which, okay, like, you know, what is the actual goal here? Hits in A zone are what really matter. Like, I am a perfectionist. I have a tendency to want these like really pretty tight groupings and all that type of stuff. But I also want to be able to negotiate a course of fire quickly. So I'm kind of at odds with myself whenever it comes to that type of thing. All right, let's talk about this slide reciprocating mass. Normally, I would characterize a 45's recoil as a push. A strong push, but more of a push. This gun is snappy. And I can tell you, after a day at the range, my hands and wrist are pretty stiff. Like they're definitely worked over pretty decent. And that's one of the things that's very difficult about shooting this gun fast, is with the snappy recoil and all that type of stuff. You would think this longer slide would help balance that out, but it does, but it doesn't. Like, I would hate to think of this gun in a shorter barrel configuration with this same slide, but I could understand why the 21 has a beefier slide. So there's a dynamic, there's a trade-off that you have to have there. Lighter gun, snappier recoil; heavier gun, less recoil, maybe a little bit more difficult to carry, all those types of things. So I've gone through a couple different attempts to maybe change up how it is that I grip and shoot the gun in order to see if I can maybe balance out that flippiness a little bit. So I tried like grabbing the front of the trigger guard. I felt like that balanced out recoil a little bit more. I didn't necessarily see an improvement in accuracy though. So I did not love that choice. I also tried like adding a light, just seeing if like keeping some weight out front would maybe help balance it out a little bit. Really didn't make that much of an improvement, which it was just a Streamlight TLR1, so it wasn't like I put a lead weight on the front of it. So that's something like shooting this gun, I really have to lean into it. I have to be on top of my recoil management as best I can in order to be able to do it quickly. And in addition to that, that's where this rough texture finish comes in, because I really notice it on this gun. Normally, I don't really notice Gen4 RTF texture. Like it doesn't really stand out to me. This gun takes away pieces of myself with it. Like it really digs into my hand. And I think that's part of that whole, like it wears out my hand to shoot this, and especially try to shoot it fast. Now, I, of course, have done a bunch of range trips with this gun. I've also taken this to a level 2 pistol course, and I was going to shoot it in a competition, but the competition got canceled, so I'm going to shoot it at the next one that comes up. I don't feel like this has necessarily held me back in other metrics. So like when I took it to that level 2 pistol course, I was still one of the top shooters in the class. So like I managed to work through with this gun, but it was work for sure. Like I had to be switched on. I had to be invested in it. It was very fatiguing in that type of way. Whereas whenever it is that I shoot this 34, it's fun. It's a lot more fun. It's a lot less effort. So, you kind of take the good with the bad with, some of the purported features of this particular handgun. All right, guys. So that's shooting. What are my recommendations when it comes to this handgun? Would I recommend this for duty use? Well, it depends. I would not make this a standard issue sidearm for any department or agency. But I would put this on the authorized list. That way, people who have the appropriate hand size to be able to handle this gun could carry it if they so choose. But I would not make it to where, some 5'1", 100-pound female had to carry this gun. because I don't, that's not going to work out for that person. Or, you know, a slender, light built man is not necessarily going to be able to handle this gun as well, depending on their hand size. Would I recommend it for home defense, self-defense? When it comes to self-defense, absolutely not. I've had some people tell me that they carry like Glock 34s and stuff like that, and I do not believe that they are effectively concealed carrying that handgun. Not in all conditions. And the issue becomes when you go about deciding to EDC large, heavy guns, which I'm heavy, this is not the heaviest gun, especially in its classification, but when you decide to carry large firearms like this, you're increasing the possibility that this gun winds up sitting in your truck or sitting at home because you were in a rush or something like that. Your way that you're dressed doesn't necessarily support it, or you didn't have the time to, you didn't want to take the time to be able to put together and all that type of stuff. And that gun that's sitting at home is not helpful. So I would not recommend this for concealed carry. I would recommend this for home defense though. Pop a light on this thing, good night sights and all that kind of stuff. The size of this gun is not a limiting factor because you're not necessarily carrying it all day at that point. It is at home, it's in a safe, it's on your bedside, it's wherever it is. That's supporting the size and weight of the firearm, and then you can employ this whenever it is that you need to. It's a fighting sized handgun which can be used for fighting sized tasks like home defense. Absolutely fantastic option for that. What about competition? Would I recommend this for competition? That is situational. If you're talking about getting into a competition that has major power factor and you want to go over there and do that type of thing, absolutely. 13 rounds, fantastic competition option at that point. Definitely a good choice. But if you're talking about competing somewhere where you're going up against 9mm handguns and you want to be competitive, I would not tell you to take this up against a Glock 34 or a SIG P320 or anything along those lines. Now, if you just want to challenge yourself, which is more or less what I'm doing in this case, if you just want to challenge yourself and then get really excited when you manage to beat some guys with, you know, lighter, higher capacity handguns with lighter recoiling options, like, yeah, I would feel pretty good if I got second place at a competition with this handgun with a bunch of people shooting 9mm. 100%, that'd feel really good. It's also a tall order to fill. You're going to have to really be on what it is that you need to be doing. What about as a woods gun? Well, this was actually in my video about woods type guns, which I'll put the link in the description. 45 ACP ammunition can be found that will be effective for stopping dangerous game. Now, you're looking at like buffalo bore or something along those lines, very specialty type of ammunition, plus P loading, hard cast ammunition. You know, make sure that you're actually getting to bone or something to stop that animal. But 13 rounds, yet again, fantastic option with that very powerful ammunition that you can get in the 45 ACP. Now, if you're telling me, oh, this is my woods gun, I carry, you know, cellular and below 230 grain FMJ, I'd be like, that's a terrible choice. You should stop doing that immediately. All right, guys, those are my recommendations. What are my uses when it comes to this gun? I bought this gun as a fighting 45. I wanted a 45 caliber chambered handgun that had all of like the modern features. I don't have a, you know, optic or anything, no optic cut or anything like that, but polymer frame, striker fired, high capacity, and all that kind of stuff. In order to be able to put myself up against it and see if I could run this as well as I could run like a Glock 34 or, you know, a Glock 45, Glock 17, APX, whatever. Have I achieved that? I'm not so certain. I've been thinking about it long and hard, and I think the competition that's coming up is going to be my time to evaluate whether or not I keep this gun. If I've been working my way up the leaderboard at my local IDPA matches. I'm taking this, I'm utilizing my duty belt exemption, and the plan is to at least maintain my standing. But if I drop my standing, then this is probably going to go the way of the dodo. If I manage to maintain, then I'm going to invest into this gun. I'm going to put a better trigger into it. I'm going to do some stuff to try to impact how it is that I work around this gun in order to get what I can out of it. But we're on the cusp. We're coming to a decision point on this gun. So we'll see what the future holds. All right, what are some competitive options out on the market? I think a lot of people would probably jump in right off the bat with the FNX 45 Tactical. I am not a fan of that handgun. At one time, like when it first came out, like back in like 2011, I thought that thing was awesome. It was the epitome of a fighting handgun stock for that time period. Now, I've seen a lot of malfunctions out of them. I'm really not that interested in the FNX 45. But a Glock 21, I think, would be a good counter offer, something else to consider if you're looking at a Glock 41, as well as an HK USP 45. So that you get almost the same capacity, but you get, proven HK reliability, durability. It's going to be more expensive on the magazines. It's going to be more expensive to find holsters and all that kind of stuff. You're getting away from the Glock aftermarket support, but they're still a time-honored and well-tested and vetted firearm. So that would be other fighting 45s to look at competitive to this one. All right, guys, I think that pretty much covers my thoughts on this particular subject. I hope you guys found this interesting, and that's pretty much what I got. Have a good day.